Good afternoon. I'm Andrew Bradley, Chair of the Aerospace Division of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers. Today's webinar is by Air Commodore Paul Lloyd on supporting the Royal Air Force's aircraft. Paul will do an introduction on his background as an engineer officer in the RAF, so without repeating what Paul is going to say, in addition to his varied career in the RAF, Paul has also been very actively involved in the IMechE for over 20 years. Previously a chair of the Peterborough Joint Area Panel, he was previous chair of the institution's Aerospace Division for 4 years. Since then, he's taken over the organising and running of the division's UAS University Challenge. Under Paul's chairmanship, this important and exciting challenge has gone from strength to strength and is now in its 5th year, attracting 36 teams from universities across the world where they design, build and test the UAS. Unfortunately, COVID-19 has not only caused Paul's talk to move online, but also this year's challenge. Nevertheless, the challenge has still been able to continue, and it will be holding its virtual award ceremony on the 19th of June. Paul has asked me to state that this presentation is his own views and not that of the Defence Equipment and Support, nor of the Ministry of Defence. So with that, I will now hand over to Paul for his talk on supporting the Royal Air Force, current and future challenges.
Good day, I am Air Commodore Paul Lloyd. I'm the head of the Typhoon delivery team in Defence Equipment and Support. And today I want to talk to you about supporting the Royal Air Force, both in current and really the future challenges. But before I do that, I think I'm probably conscious that we're not seeing each other face to face. I might do a little introduction of who I am. So I'm an engineer officer in the Royal Air Force. I've been in the Air Force now for 29 years. And as you can see from the pictures, most of my time I've spent supporting, looking after at all lines of depth and maintenance. Tornado, which as many of you will be aware, sadly went out of service April last year. Not only that, both supporting the aircraft both in operations at home, I've also, in my last role, was the chief engineer for all the unmanned air systems in the MOD. There's a picture from me there, bottom left-hand side, sorry, you can see there in front of a Royal Air Force Reaper out in Afghanistan. That was again a job I did for about 4 or so years. Before, in August 16, I moved to my current role as the head of the Typhoon delivery team in DE&S, Defence Equipment and Support. Responsible for not only the support of the RAF Typhoon fleet, but also for the upgrade of the aircraft as well. And in fact, it's really looking at the upgrade that I want to turn to next, and in terms of why I want to talk about support to the Royal Air Force. So over the last few years, the Royal Air Force has totally recapitalised many of its major platforms, and some of the pictures here give an indication of the aircraft we're talking about. Again, the VC-10 went out of service a couple of years ago, replaced by the Voyager aircraft, and also in the strategic airlift role, the A400M, which again you can see in the top right-hand side. From a combat air perspective, you'll all be aware of the F-35B Lightning that came into service again back end of 2018 at Royal Air Force Marham, again replacing the Harrier, and also to some degree the Tornado, which went out of service. On the top left-hand side is the P-8 Poseidon aircraft. We've just had, I think, our 3rd aircraft delivered into service up at RAF Lossiemouth. Now that is replacing the Nimrod MR2 that went out of service in 2010. So again, a bit of a capability gap, but we're now starting to see those aircraft arrive into service to carry out the maritime patrol role. And then close to my heart, in the middle, at the bottom, is Typhoon. Worth noting that whilst Typhoon came into service in 2003, our last of our Typhoons were actually delivered last September, the last of the 160 Typhoons that the RAF has bought. So now we have a full complement. Again, certainly replacing the Tornado, and again, significant amount of work last year and the year before that over Project Centurion, as we knew it, to take the capabilities that were delivered by Tornado and put them onto Typhoon. So now Typhoon is a fully multi-role combat aircraft moving into the future. So today's presentation, as you can see, here's the outline. First of all, I just want to talk you through how we support our RAF aircraft, and really using what's called the transformation staircase as a model to look at how we've transformed our support over the last couple of decades. Then, in terms of how do we actually support aircraft moving from the past and into the future, I'll use Typhoon as a case study. And I'm going to focus on the new support contract called Typhoon Total Availability Enterprise, or Titan, and some lessons identified on that contract of how we support our aircraft. I'll then look to how the current aircraft are supported that are in the fleet, and some new ones coming in, how we support them at the moment. And then I've got some ideas about future support, both where those aircraft would go to, and again, using Typhoon, some ideas for how we can look to further transform the support to our frontline aircraft. This is it's known as the support transformation staircase, and it's a model that we've been using for a number of years now. And really, over the last 20 years in the Royal Air Force, we have completely changed the way we support our aircraft. Back in the 1990s and before that, very much in what we would call a traditional model. There you're seeing that the support organisation, here marked as Defence Equipment Support, but its previous organisations such as Defence Logistics Organisation, DLO, was mainly, there was full responsibility for the repair and overhaul, maintenance, spares buying of those platforms and equipment. You also then saw that the Royal Air Force itself would have undertaken most of the maintenance with a bay type setup, where the bays doing the component repairs were there. We were supporting everything around it. So as you can imagine, the role from suppliers was very minimal. DNS and its predecessors managed myriads of suppliers, myriads of spares, and again, something that was close to my heart in Tornado early days. That is how we supported our aircraft then. Then as we moved into the 1990s, and a little bit before that, but around that sort of time, we then started to march up the staircase. And here we're now seeing spares inclusive arrangements. It's pretty obvious what we're talking about there. Here we have a repair and overhaul contract, or repair contract, where we give responsibility for ensuring that the spares that are needed for that repair are taken by the contractor, by the supplier. I think this is a pretty big step on the staircase if one looks at it in terms of risk transfer from the MOD to the supplier, because they have full responsibility ensuring that equipment comes out for the price you've agreed. But again, we were then, as a organisation, still responsible ultimately for the availability of the equipment to the front line. We might have repaired a number of items, be it LRIs, or avionic equipment or engines, but we would be responsible then for the actual ensuring that the front line had the available kit it needed to use it. And even then, the maintenance was almost certainly being done predominantly by Royal Air Force people. So then about 20 or so years ago, we started to see what was known as contracting for availability. Here, and as you can see mentioned on the slide, the supplier now takes responsibility for the availability of the platform itself, for the availability of its equipment to an agreed standard and performance. So really, we're now transferring the risk of that availability from the MOD to the supplier. And again, a significant change in the way we do business, and responsibility and relationship with that supplier has to be required in order to do that. And again, I'm going to concentrate very much this presentation on that contracting for availability, what it means, and sort of the challenges we've had with that, really. The final one there up the staircase we call contract for capability. Now, in reality, whilst that is the top of the staircase, there's really only one platform that has got there, in my view, and that's Voyager. Here, you're contracting for a full-out capability, in this case, Voyager air-to-air refueling or transport. And the contract is fully responsible for delivering that service to the front line, to the Royal Air Force, and to agreed performance parameters. Again, a very complex type of contract, and really we've only really seen that on the Voyager. And again, I'll cover some reasons why I think that is the case as we go through the presentation, but maybe we can pick that up a little bit in questions if you'd like. So what I thought I'd do now is to take Typhoon as a case study, clearly close to my heart, and a role I've been for a number of years now. So I can give a better insight into this particular platform, this aircraft, and how we've, again, over the last few years, transformed the way we support it. What you can see here is that a kind of the model of why we do this. So clearly, quite often it's about reducing operating costs, saving money. Very important. We need to ensure that we are able to minimise our spend on support in aircraft. And again, a lot of that is about transferring risk. But not only that, is to make sure we reinvest in capabilities. So Typhoon is going to be in service now. It came into service in 2003, and it's been constantly upgraded, and it's going to be constantly upgraded till it leaves service at least 2040. Again, that I think will might extend a bit until a new platform comes into service to replace it. So that's a pretty significant life cycle, nearly 40 years, if not longer. So again, we've got to keep investing in the capabilities and keep the platform and aircraft relevant to the war that we need to fight. So by investing in capability, we enhance the Typhoon product, so we can do more with it. And that obviously increases the competitive advantage, the military capability of that particular platform in the case of Typhoon to deliver more. But again, we've got to keep going. We've got to keep looking at ways of saving money, being more efficient to drive down the cost of supporting these expensive platforms. And this is really now. I'll turn to Typhon Total Availability Enterprise, and in terms of how that has transformed the way we do supporting Typhoon over the last few years. The important thing to realise about any new support contract, and certainly Titan, is that it's built in the past. Here you can see, not quite 20 years, but around 20 years of availability type contracting, which I talked about on the transformation staircase. From 2002, which is really the Nimrod, was the first support contract that was focused around availability. We tended to call them integrated support contracts. That was the phrase. IOSs was the kind of phrase that was used back then. From 2002 into VC10s, into Sentries, and you can see particularly around Tornado, which again I was heavily involved in the development of the Tornado availability contract, TAC contract in 2007. And each time you're taking experiences, you're learning from the good and the bad aspects of those availability contracts, those contractings, and building on them. So when we get to the top, and I'm going to talk about Titan, which we let in August 2016, again, you can see there's not a good 15, 16, 70 years of experience there built into that contract, and hence quite a tall order to just jump straight in. And again, really about evolution of these contracts to try and improve and drive out the efficiencies and drive, importantly, I think, correct behaviours across the enterprise, that would be our industry, the deliverer, DNS, who are sort of the key supporting organisation, and then like the front line who deliver the capability, making sure we get the right behaviours across that enterprise. And really what I'm trying to say here in this slide is that Typhoon very much has marched up the staircase. So not only with those platforms I mentioned before, if you were to look at Typhoon itself, you can see that we've moved up from a fairly traditional setup when the aircraft first came to service in 2003 to the setup was called Case White. That's when the aircraft were initially flown out of BAE Systems at Warton. As we learnt to use this cutting edge as it was then and still is, fourth generation aircraft. Again, a traditional contract. We then moved up through into the Typhoon Availability Service, TAS, but that was really, that TAS contract was very much around maintenance and output of the aircraft. So whilst we moved the support and maintenance upgrade of the platform itself to RAF Coningsby, and all the major maintenance is carried out on base there by BAE Systems contractors, supported by quite a heavy support from the Royal Air Force personnel, technicians as well, actually within those that supported and provided into the contractors government furnished equipment. Behind that was quite a complicated supply chain. NETMA is the management agency that looks after Typhoon and previously Tornado. And through there, a number of support contracts, and you'll see some of the titles in a minute, which looked after avionics, equipment, were fairly traditional, or spares inclusive type, if we were lucky, arrangements for repairing those items. And again, brought that together to provide support to the aircraft. And really, it was only really when we moved up to Titan now that we're seeing ourselves moving up to the top end of the staircase, not quite to that capability, but I'd argue it's pretty close. So Titan itself is definitely on the upper end of the contracting for availability space. So what I'll do now, I think, is just explain a little bit about what Titan is and how the contract is organised. So now I'm going to give a bit of explanation about the background of the Typhoon Total Availability Enterprise, or Titan, as we call it, and really explain how this contract has developed and where it came from. Titan itself really has been in gestation for several years. It was 2013 or 2014 under the Future Support Optimization Mechanism or model, FSOM, was the project that was developed in order to look at how we can reduce the cost of support for Typhoon. Typhoon is a very complicated aircraft and weapon system. It is therefore unsurprisingly expensive to support. And really, we did need to drive those costs down. More importantly, drive availability up and output up. So Titan came into being. It was signed in 2016. It's a 10-year contract and output-based with a focus on flying hours output. And again, I'll cover a little bit more of that in a moment. Importantly, though, by moving to this contract, we took 40% out of the costs. So we saved around 40% to invest back into future capability. So to date, through the Titan contract, we've been able to recycle, as we say, around £500 million worth of capability upgrades onto Typhoon to keep it relevant now and into the future. Again, an important way of moving the money from support into upgrade and that cycle we saw before. It's an output-based service. So again, when we look at the history of the growth of the contracts, as we discussed before, this Titan does differ significantly. Previously, you might have seen the early availability contracts would have been, and then Attack was a classic example on Tornado, very much focused on delivery of available aircraft, not just service, but available aircraft to the front line, on the squadron, ready to go flying. Titan moves that forward and now looks at output base. It looks at flying hours and synthetic simulated availability as well, not just numbers of aircraft on the flight line. And again, I'll major on that a little bit because that's quite important. Again, it's a fully integrated solution. So we've got a key avionics provider, Leonardo, up at Edinburgh and in Luton predominantly. Again, part of a joint avionics service. Again, key because this is a electric aircraft. We have 92 computers on Typhoon. They need constant upgrade and looking after and very expensive support. So the JAS is a key enabler to delivering that service. But also importantly, these has to be long-term deals. So the 10-year deal really provided the incentive to industry to invest into the long term and drive transformation, which again I'll cover. But the thing I suppose I really want to bring out about Titan is the fact that it operates as a single enterprise. Here we've got the provider, BAE Systems, albeit first tier, supported by Leonardo under JAS, the Royal Air Force, and Defence Equipment Support, my team. So, and again, this is the key difference to my mind to where Titan is from previous contracts. We've now brought the front line in, whereas previously under Attack it was BAE Systems and DNS. Now we've got the Royal Air Force, the Force Commander, his Force Headquarters team fully involved. And indeed, at RAF Coningsby, Royal Air Force Coningsby, the team of senior leadership team all sit together in a single building. We have the Typhoon Force Commander is absolutely responsible for the output of the contract and is monitoring it, supported by my team and supported by BAE Systems team as one entity, as a single enterprise, and all decisions are taken in that way. I think now if I come to a little bit more details about how the contract is set up and its key performance indicators. So as this graph shows, this gives a kind of graphical representation over time of how Titan evolved. As I mentioned before, Titan really allowed us to bring together a number of previous contracts. I mentioned TAS and then RDSS, which is the avionics support, PC4, PC5. These are contracts that were set up through Europe and the European set up through NETMA to manage component repairs. And contract one, which is really predominantly a post-design services and enabling contract for key support services. So again, bringing those three elements together, those number of contracts together into a single entity called Titan. Again, a major way of both reducing friction costs, reducing costs as well. I mentioned the recycling. You can see there the sort of level of recycling that we've started and already have identified methods of making that availability to the front line, and we've already seen some significant upgrades being funded in order to allow us to keep Typhoon relevant. One thing I would bring out here is that you see at the bottom of the graph it says non-recurring investment. I think this is important as well. If you want to set up this new sort of type of contract and really drive some savings, then you do need to invest in certain aspects. So we had a number of areas that require investment to allow us to move the project forward, be it a new building, be it prime pumping the spares, be it more resource to deal with it. And really that was key to enabling us to drive Titan forward. And again, something that we've not often done, and I have to say MOD isn't always particularly good at understanding, is that need to invest up to make savings down the line. But again, in this one, the team were able to produce that. As I mentioned before, very much a function around the recycling. And again, I think you shouldn't underplay the importance of recycling. That does drive some really good behaviours and also incentivizes industry to ensure that the money they save, they have confidence will be spent, can be spent later on as well. And again, it drives some really good behaviours. It also, as a contract, as I mentioned, delivers flying hours. So we have a pay per flying hour setup. And again, learning on experience, building on Chinook, in fact, rather than the combat air sphere. Chinook had a really forward-leaning availability contract. So again, why reinvent? Look at what Chinook did, and again, they built on that in order to drive it forward. But very much through this one-team approach. I think this slide gives an indication, really importantly, how the contract itself is actually set up and managed. Whilst the focus is clearly very much on the top left-hand side in terms of the actual revenue, how do we pay for the contract? And what you see is a pay-per flying hour setup. So the contract itself has a core baseline guaranteed level output, around 20,000 flying hours for Typhoon, that sort of level. And then what we see then is if you fly above it, and in case of Typhoon, heavily committed to operations, so pretty high level of output, you basically pay per go, you pay per flying hour, and we have an agreed mechanism for paying for the additional hour every hour we fly. Really simple, and that was a key. Moving away from a very complicated, what we saw in some of the other contracts, revenue stream of measures, to a very simple one, which it's all about the plan. So get the plan right, and then fly the plan, and then you get paid the money. And that's basically how the enterprise works. Very simple, very focused, and a very useful way of driving an incentive. It also really allows us, though, it's important to get the right sort of behaviours as well, as I keep mentioning. And previous contracts, again, what's been very successful, quite often led to some behaviours, predominantly around the way the commercials are set up, the indicators are set up, that drove some necessarily behaviours that we wouldn't want to see across the enterprise. So this is what's quite important, that we have a number of other measures and resilience indicators that affect that. So one side of that really is around, you can see sort of non-flying services. So we need to make sure the safety net with the platform, and training services. Again, this is looking at predominantly synthetics. And again, indicators around that we're maintaining the platform as a safe platform to operate. Not only that, in the bottom right-hand side, on the resilience side, other measures that just make sure that we're doing the right thing, be it through bank of hours, and that is really looking at the total number of hours available across the fleet to fly the future plan, not just this year, but a number of years in the future. So have we stored enough hours up in those aircraft? Are we maintaining sufficient aircraft through the depth environment, and are the front line maintaining the aircraft available to the front line in order to generate enough hours, and call it the bank of hours, to deliver the forward plan. Inventory is key. What we haven't done, and we're not able to do, is to significantly reduce our inventory holding. Again, because of when the aircraft came into service, we own and will continue to own a lot of that inventory. MOD own it. It's just over, I think it's around £2 billion of inventory we own on Typhoon. So We've got to make sure that inventory is looked after and managed correctly. We drive down wastage. We don't just want to store stuff that's not going to get used, and we keep using it. And again, so the indicators around that, the health of the inventory itself, and again, how quickly we body modifications. Really important to keep the platform relevant. We've got to keep the modifications, upgrades going. So again, how's that doing? If you just focus on flying and the revenue, there is a risk, as you can imagine, that it all becomes about flying and less about ensuring that the general health is there. So the resilience indicators are absolutely key to balance that off, to make sure we're not just pushing the fleet and then, good today for a problem tomorrow. And the final thing I keep mentioning is recycling and the ability to recycle that money. Keep driving down costs, looking at mechanisms. Typhoon is a arrangement we call the Target Cost Incentive Fee, TCIF arrangement, whereby we set a line, and if we achieve, or as enterprise, achieve the cost of the contract under that, then we share the benefits together. If we don't, then there's a pay and share arrangement, and both industry and the MOD will have to then pay money back. So again, incentivize the contractor, incentivize the enterprise in order to make sure that we we save where we can, but still deliver the outputs as required. In order really to deliver that strap line, to get the right aircraft at the right capability at the right time to deliver the output. Absolutely key. So as I said, Typhoon's been running, it's nearly 4 years now, and I came into the job just as the contract was signed. So I've very much seen the mobilisation and introduction of this new contract. And again, 4 years in of a 10-year deal, so I've got a way to go. What have we learned? What are the key factors that come out of this? And there's a few here I'd sort of really want to bring out. Well, as with all project management, successful projects, alignment of objectives is absolutely key, and output is crucial. Really important to understand what the platform's going to do and what its requirements are. And the key to that, in my mind, was bringing the front line. Historically, under Tornado, under Attack, etc., those sort of contracts, we sort of kept the front line a little bit slightly hands off, but slightly further away, which meant that we're always at that time battling around what's the flying plan, why are we flying these hours, why aren't we flying, and what's the reason behind it. And really, this Typhoon's allowed us to really focus in on that. We have a joint fleet planning cell, again, with a frontline, my people, and the DNS people and industry, looking at both the strategic and tactical, and in-year delivery plan that we all sign up to at the beginning of the year around what are we going to fly by squadron, who's going to fly what. And again, a real focus on ensuring that every hour is flown. And if we don't fly, why didn't we fly? Was it aircrew availability? Was it availability of equipment? What was the reason? And if it's, again, are the squadrons planning their outputs correctly? That's really quite important. I keep going back over it. Reinvestment of support savings is a powerful incentive. It really is. Having lived through some recent contract negotiations and other areas where that reinvestment wasn't available, it's quite difficult sometimes to move forward. And I think undeniably that's been a real success factor in Typhoon, allowing the savings not just the reinvestment in support savings not to be just taken as a pure saving and spent elsewhere, but reinvested on a platform is a real incentive for all. But transformation, as you can see, is a long journey. I mean, it says a 5-year process. I'd argue that we've been on this journey since the early 2000s, and Typhoon is just but the latest, and again, a significant step forward, but still just the latest. But really, it's a long process that I'm now beginning to see behaviours, the right sort of behaviours of the team, but we constantly have to reinforce it. You need to keep reinforcing the behaviours and the cultural to get that cultural change across the enterprise to see that this is an approach that we all have a role in delivering the outcome, not an individual player. Blame industry, blame front line, blame DNS. That's not going to help anybody. And part of that really is the customer has to change, and that's been a big journey for the front line. Again, they've been building up to it, but certainly in the fast jet world, this has been a step forward. And as I said, the force commander absolutely is responsible for that contract delivery and outcome. Chairs the key meetings, has daily meetings with the Typhoon team around how the contract's performing. Whereas before, would have just been worried about while the squadrons are flying is very much now and very integrated and worried and bothered and concerned about ensuring that the outcome of the hangar is correct, that it's a good standard, and the input into that hangar is correctly. Are the squadrons doing the right thing, and is the industry doing the right thing by the squadrons? So again, significant change, and that's really the key factor here, that we've all had to change to do that. And we're seeing that really in the way that leadership, most of this is about leadership. So we have a 2-star oversight committee on Titan, chaired by the Air Officer Commanding Number 1 Group, the AOC, my boss, Director Combat Air, and the sort of senior person, Andrea Thompson, in BA Systems, a regular review to make sure that we are driving the right behaviours and that leadership is taking place to drive this forward, and not just allowing the contract to take its course. And that's a key factor, really. This is a constant journey, and even after 4 years, after 5 years, we're going to need to keep refreshing that environment, looking at new projects to save money. You cannot sit back and just let it happen. You've got to keep driving that contract forward. You've got to keep finding ways of driving savings, and again, really active, good ideas mechanism, bright ideas mechanism to make sure that we can keep thinking of every little saving we can get at to drive out waste and inefficiency. And I think this slide just kind of encapsulates a real world example of the kind of behavioural change. Historically, it was the station's job to get out there and clear the runway. If snow fell, I suspect quite often a lot less snow than that would have caused us to stop in England, but maybe not elsewhere. But certainly we would have had problems, and it was the station's job under blacktop operations, as we call them, to get that runway running again. But not the case under Titan. We saw it flippant ahead. We saw the industry partner absolutely keen to get out there and get that snowplow out and clear the runway, because again, it's output based. We don't fly the hours, be it for whatever reason, they don't get paid, we don't deliver the outcome. And again, generates really interesting, really good behaviours around, it's in their interest to get us to fly those aircraft. And really good encapsulates, I think, the key difference that contracts such as Titan allow us to deliver. So now, having looked at Typhoon and again Titan as an example of how we've changed our support and moved up that transformation staircase, this is some work PwC has done, or doing, I should say, around looking at the current support strategies and where we may take them to. Again, it's just really good to be able to enjoy the moment when PwC, so they take the work and then I can reuse some consultants' work again. Always enjoy that. So what you see here really is that this is pretty much our current fleet and the future. So E7, the new replacement for the Century aircraft, again, not yet in service, a number of years away yet, but is on the list. As you can see there, currently, we're mostly seeing aircraft sitting in the spares inclusive early availability contracting space, with only really Typhoon at the moment in platform availability, and as I said before, Voyager as the only platform we've got in a capability platform where it's delivering that service, be it air-to-air refueling or strategic airlift around the world. And really, this is a case of, so why is that the case, and where can we move to? And one thing I would say is things like Lightning and P-8. So Lightning just come into service, is only 2 years into service, and as we saw with Typhoon under Case White and before predating TAS, it's not surprising to see a fairly relatively simple support contract, which we then need to build on as we gain more experience of that platform. So as we get more experience of Lightning, as we understand how the system works, noting that we are in Lightning and F-35, a smaller player in a significant machine of F-35s, of several thousand F-35s that will be out there. Again, ensuring how can we drive that forward. A little bit like P-8. P-8, we are now, again, a platform delivered around the world. Again, we are part of it, as we see with C-17 as well. And again, mainly through foreign military sales, FMS type support from the US quite often, again, limits your ability to move forward. So that's why we kind of see the platforms as where they are at the moment. In broad terms, as you see in the note there, it differs between certain platforms. For example, the Typhoon engine contract is a spares inclusive arrangement at the moment. We do move around, but that gives you a general idea of kind of where the platforms sit. But we mentioned before, where do we want to get to? And here is some work again that the team are doing around, well, where should we get to? What should we do? And as you see here, they've broken it down into a number of, I would almost say, extra steps on the staircase, really, taking it a slightly different avenue from contracting for capability to other aspects. And the main one I want to focus on in a minute is around that availability of support and training, and I'll come back to that on Typhoon in a minute. But as you can see, we'd expect Lightning, Hawk, etc., and that's certainly T2 and Hawk to move forwards in terms of their contracting for availability. Lightning, absolutely, certainly. Again, on the platforms that are predominantly driven through FMS, be it C17, what can we do around that? And in terms of a number of ideas around what we call hybrid FMS. So really, what can you drive the most amount of efficiencies out of that arrangements, noting that we tend to be a small part player. C17s, the number of aircraft we've got compared to those out in the worldwide fleet, you just wouldn't. You want to take the benefits of the global system, so you will need to do that. But how do you drive the right behaviours in the industry? So work that's going on, looking at hybrid FMSs, etc., and again, that work. But what I really wanted to focus here really is around Typhoon again, and where might Titan 2 go? Where might we take Titan in the future? And I think that's what I'll look at next. So as I mentioned, I just wanted to focus now on where might we take Typhoon in the future. Where might the next availability contract or next contract post Titan in 2026 take us to? Titan was a significant step and is a significant step on that journey of how we support our frontline aircraft. And really, we now need to look at what can we do in the future. How can we drive those savings, efficiencies in after we've done that? And really, we're now looking around integrating output and training. As we move forward with platforms, 4th gen, 5th gen, etc., future platforms, synthetics is absolutely key. We've seen that with our new unmanned air systems, soon to replacing the Reapers with Protector. Again, significant changes in the way we do business and abilities to actually do a lot of training in a simulated environment. And in fact, that's certainly where we want to take things in the future. So what we need to do now is to make sure that we integrate that synthetic training as well as the output training. We want to incentivize that we do, where possible, a synthetic hours of training, not a real hour of training, unless it's absolutely necessary. Flying airplanes is an expensive business. Synthetics is inherently more cost effective. And in fact, as we get into new future capabilities, many of which can only really be tested in the synthetic environment due to some of the classifications involved. So absolutely, you've got to drive that forward. So we need to incentivize that in the future. And under the current Titan arrangements, while we look after the availability of the synthetics, it doesn't really drive, because of the way the setup is, it doesn't quite drive the behaviours you want around ensuring that we maximise synthetics. Key to that, though, is upgrading the synthetics capability so they are as good, if not better, than what is delivered on the real aircraft. For Typhoon, last Christmas, we signed what's called TFST, Typhoon Future Synthetic Training Project, £260 million project to totally upgrade the synthetics on Typhoon and take it to the next step, really. Allied to that, we are generating a new mission planning system. Again, and this is key, integrating the synthetics, the mission planning, and the live flying mission, as well as the actual aircraft. So all bringing that all together in a fully embedded way, making sure that your live virtual setup is absolutely clear and driving the right behaviours. And really, this is key to enabling the future, whatever the future combat air platform may be. It's going to rely heavily on synthetics because absolutely where savings are. So this is a step in the right direction in terms of understanding that. And again, part of ensuring that we gain most benefit from this, both for us and for partners and for other nations, is making this as export. So Typhoon is sold in service with the Royal Saudi Air Force. It's soon to be going in service with the Kuwait, and in 22 into Qatar. So again, lots of benefits there around export, ensuring that we're aligned in terms of the way we do business and in line in terms of training. So if we can align these contracts together, again, you see efficiencies in that. And I think this is where we really want to be taking the contracts, certainly around combat air, and to some degree, some of the platforms, maybe iStar, slightly less so for the transport fleet because of the nature of the business. but certainly for mission combat aircraft, where the mission system and the mission is all now flying the aeroplane is to some degree less important than the actual mission and the capabilities within that mission system. So absolutely key that we drive that forward and look very much focused on that. And I think that is where we're going to take things in the future. And this is work that we're doing with BAE Systems now, hence it's their model around the STEP, as we're calling it, future ideas for a new contract. So that presentation, I looked at the model for how we supported our aircraft, how we transformed our support over the last 20 years, focused on Titan and Typhoon as a case study for, again, what I mean by that level of transformation that we've carried out, and how we totally support our aircraft is fundamentally changed in my time in the Royal Air Force. A little bit then about how we support the current fleet, which has been totally changed over the last few years, and where that needs to get to. Again, a constant drive to ensure that we're supporting aircraft in the most efficient and effective way. Constant work for doing for that. And with Typhoon, then looking at how we move forward post Titan, and as I said before, the idea that we need to fully integrate a synthetic solution through TFST's delivery, mission planning, as well as just the aircraft on the front line, to ensure that the mission itself, which is key, is actually delivered most effectively.
Thank you, Paul.
So I'm now happy to take any questions.
For your presentation. That was very well done. And now I'll put some of the questions that have been coming through to Paul. And thank you for listening. But if you can put forward your questions, these are some that have been coming through already. In line with the engineering capability strategy of levering our potential, creating inspirational career pathways and use of engineering skills to best effect, can we be sure that the RAF will robustly challenge the norm of utilising costly support contracts to carry out tasks that are already within the engineer skill set, such as minor repairs on HMSS and Striker 2? Quick examples, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew, and hello everybody out there. Yeah, so I think I'll break that into two aspects really, around your question there, Matt. So the first is around the cost effectiveness and getting the contracts right. So be absolutely sure that any kind of new contract goes through the process of scrutiny to ensure that it offers value for money, and also that we understand what the best way to deliver that service and its impact on operational risk. Again, another question talked about this, I think, as well. So we always have to prove to the approving authorities, the independent authorities, that what the contract we're going to put together is value for money, and that actually we are ensuring the risk is carried correctly. So again, in another contract area, we recently stepped away from an availability type setup, not on the aircraft, core aircraft, but to a spares inclusive, because that offered best value for money. So again, you can be assured that is always under scrutiny, and we don't move forward without that. The next step you talk about the sort of engineering, RAF engineers capability strategy, and in terms of sort of our skill sets. So again, we always looking at what are the skills that the front line needs. What do we want out of our RAF engineering officers, technicians in the future, and what do they need to be able to best support the aircraft on the front line? So within that, we would have a number of technicians mainly, but also engineer officers embedded in the Titan contract. So within the hangar itself at Coningsby, there's a fair number of technicians working both on the aircraft and in the aircraft support bays, fixing equipment. And again, we always, through the engineering branch sponsor and trade and branch sponsor, was looking at the skills that they have and the skills that are transferable and ensuring they're matched. So again, if the skill sets we don't think we need, and there are skill sets nowadays that we don't believe we necessarily are best, where would we wish to put the RAF people to gain the best skills, and then recycle that again, that skill set from the depth environment to the front line and back again to help the front line. So that constant is always going on to make sure that we've got a good balance of skills. Again, where is it also best for industry to carry out our repairs for us? Because again, we don't nowadays do that. So that is always under review. I hope that answers that question.
Okay, thank you, Paul. The contractors are taking more responsibility for the availability and capability, optimised for cost saving. But is there a risk that the operational delivery risk deciders become the contractors, but the risk, those exposed to the risk are the actual RAF maintainers? What are your thoughts?
Again, yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think I sort of made this, I said it earlier on, I said it in the presentation. Ultimately, the MOD, the Royal Air Force, carries the operational risk. That is always going to be the case. And whilst we see more contractors being utilised on operations, you rarely will see that, ultimately that is ultimately the responsibility of the Royal Air Force. That's what we're here to do. So we've got to be always aware of that risk balance in terms of where is the right line between contractor support and the front line and the skills and the risks that go with that. Again, it very much depends on the operations. If you're working in a relatively benign operation, Operation Shader flying out of RAF Akatir in Cyprus at the moment, there's a fairly well-filled base, so therefore you're able to have support. If you go further forward, then obviously you into operations, in deployed locations, and it's less the case. So we always need to be able to understand how you deliver that operational capability. And that is something we'll always keep an eye on, and that's why there's always discussions about where should the line be drawn. So again, under Titan, we're monitoring the support. So and it's worked extremely well. If we need to get a contractor's verted party out to fix a deep repair, and we can send them out to fix the aircraft, and that's well embedded within the contract to do that. Again, if we need to train up RF technicians to do that, again, we've done that as well, if it depends on where we are. So always keep an eye on it and making sure that the balance is right. I don't think you'll ever see the point, that there will always be, the frontline squadrons will always be, RAF. I can't see that in any way that they would ever move away from that. So that's always where the line gets drawn. But again, it's always aware of that. But by getting the right behaviours in the contract as well, we start seeing the right behaviours around support. So, BA systems and et cetera are always focused on ensuring we deliver that front line. And again, even we've seen in the recent COVID challenges we've had where the Typhoon force is still very, very busy, being on quick reaction alert or on operations. That work's got to carry on. Then absolutely focused on ensuring that they are able to meet, despite the challenges, whilst keeping their people safe and our people safe, that we can deliver it. So again, always a focus on the baby is always there to do that. But we keep it in monitoring, and again, always therefore keep the operational deployment as a role of frontline commander, not of industry. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Paul. You mentioned behavioural changes in the front line. Do you consider that you've also seen changes in industry, particularly on transparency of end-to-end risk? Examples of the supply chain issues that may impact future support, including ops.
Yeah. So and I think I mentioned it. This is, there is a significant change in behaviours over the years around the relationship between industry and the RAF and DNS and my organisation. I would certainly say that this is not overnight. As I mentioned, we've been on this journey for many years, nearly 2 decades now. And so you see the relationships building, and you see people now, people I work alongside, we've grown up in industry together on these contracts, and we understand our relationships and we work together. So you absolutely do see changing relationships in terms of understanding that. And I'd say also on the MOD side, so, the understanding that, industry is there and has to make, it needs to make a profit to exist, but provided that's not excessive, then we need to understand that together. So driving efficiencies, but understanding that you still need to be a robust business model behind that. Otherwise, industry won't take the business on. So that's something we're always constantly monitoring and driving. And again, I'm a real believer in putting the tensions in there as well. So always have a challenging contract, always have a challenging demand on each other. And again, certainly we see that through Titan, holding each other to account all the time on our deals. So certainly, we're certainly now seeing, for example, in the forum, and I had one earlier this week, squadrons aren't flying, and we look into the analysis of why, And let's say, for example, that was down to a lack of availability of pilots, for example. You're now seeing industry asking questions of the frontline squadron, say, what are you doing about that? As much as the frontline squadrons turn around to industry and saying, where's my spares, where's my aeroplane? So actually, really healthy tension there to make sure we're holding each other to account and driving forward and keeping that risk about right and the behaviour right. But certainly, my point would be this is not an overnight change. This is years, decades of that environment. And when one looks at other nations who don't tend to have that relationship and still maybe a little bit more traditional, in my view, in the way that they work, you see that they just find it difficult to adapt. So it is a cultural journey that I think it's been a long way to go. Not there yet. Always need to keep going. Always keep working on it until we get to to whatever the nirvana may be.
Thank you, Paul. There was a couple of questions around the staircase. One was highlighting that the Voyager was at the top of the transformation staircase, but it seemed quite a gap down to where other aircraft were. And also there was a question over whether there could be something beyond where Voyager is into the actual implementation of a capability by the contractors.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. So, as I said, with that staircase is one that we've drawn up a while ago, and I think it's a really good model for thinking about, where you'd wish to go. I suppose my point would be, again, on reflection, is that not necessarily is the answer, the ultimate aim that everything should march up to the top, and the top of the staircase is always the right answer. And if indeed, even if that is, as you said, the top of the staircase, Voyager, is I'd argue probably the only aircraft we've got that is on a full contracting for capability contract, and that's really a number of reasons. I think one is around the fact that that was from the outset was the plan. So that again, when that contract was being set up, the whole where the aircraft are bought, where aircraft are serviced, and the organisation around it was set up to deliver that. So hence, it would be quite difficult, I think, for certain capabilities to be able to move there if they've been under a different arrangement. That might be challenging. I think the other thing to do is it's around understanding the task and the air-to-air refuelling and air transport task that air tanker support. Whilst I wouldn't say it's easy, and I know that friends of mine are working on it, and they're probably on the line now screaming at me saying it's not an easy day, but certainly it's in terms of a mission, and the requirements of the aircraft, it's easier to detail. Combat aircraft, it's harder. The nature of the business means that there's more challenges around the systems and the mission, the various different types of systems you use. It will be, in my view, a similar issue for things like P-8, etc., which are very complex mission systems, to be able to model that and work it out. So I think it helps that the nature of the business is more akin to something that you can probably describe, and hence why you can get a reasonable contract and reasonable understanding and relationship with a contract for that capability, which again I think would be difficult in my view around some of the more complex mission systems and missions that some of the aircraft fly. So I think that's probably one of the reasons. And again, in terms of is that the top, as I sort of mentioned in the presentation, I think there are a number of, I'm not quite sure how to describe this. There's a top step and there's a number of other staircases that lead off from that. I'll think of a better phrase in a minute. Whereby, for Typhoon, I don't think necessarily the answer is a pure capability answer, because, as I said, because of the nature of the business and the operational role that the aircraft has and its deployments. Whereas I think looking at integrating simulators, etc., is probably a better way to go. Other ones will be, again, if you're under C-17s, again, part of a massive worldwide fleet, and we are, again, a relatively small player in a pretty significant machine. Why would you not continue to take the benefits of that setup that you're offered? But again, look to improve relationships where you can through this hybrid sort of FMS type arrangement. So again, these are a number of sort of branches off that staircase after which you've got to availability in my mind that would allow a more effective use of that aircraft in its role or its complexity. And again, so no one size would fit all at the top, in my view.
Thank you, Paul. There's another question we have is that what is the direction of travel on synthetic training, and in particular on the technology being considered, and how much, for example, does artificial intelligence form part of the solution?
So again, always looking at new technologies, that's always key to us. I would say artificial intelligence at the moment isn't kind of where we're looking at going in this particular platform and this capability. Synthetics for us is around improving the synthetic environment such that it is, as I said, the same if not better than the aircraft. I mean, you can't always repeat everything that's in the aircraft. G, etc. is harder to, G-force is harder to do, and it can be done, but it can be quite expensive. But yet, what you want to be looking at there is a way of ensuring that the mission system is as good, and the pilot gets the same experience and training value. And then certainly when we see new systems coming in, some of the complex missions, they are much better done in a simulated environment. So it's about getting the simulation and not so much the fidelity is the word we use in terms of the mission of the visuals, but the fidelity and the accuracy of the mission to be able to practice and rehearse very complex missions that we're starting to see now. And certainly as we put increased capabilities onto these aircraft, and certainly with Lightning they see it already, very complex aircraft and complex mission systems. You're best off doing that in a synthetic environment where you can practice it. Stop and rehearse again, and not do it in environment in the live environment, which is more costly and also less repeatable sometimes. So I think there is probably a role for AI, artificial intelligence or machine learning to help improve the mission effectiveness, but it's not necessarily something that we're rushing for on this particular platform at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Question on how do you deal with the certain uncertainties of operations like on the Titan contract?
Sorry, could you repeat that again? Sorry, Andrew.
How do you deal with the uncertainties on operations? In other words, when you go into, if there's a war footing or something within the contract of Titan?
Yeah, so again, this is always a challenge, and again, hence why you need the contract to be as flexible as possible. Typhoon now has a quite a significant range of capabilities. We put Brimstone, Storm Shadows, and it's also its air-to-air role. So you're right. So it's got a whole bunch of roles that it can and does undertake now. So really, it's about keeping yourself alive to what the front line needs. As I said, this is around. So I'm really talking around sort of the needed support equipment and spares. And what we do then is just really keep an eye on what is the mission essential equipment we need. Do we have sufficient levels of it? If that changes, we need to be flexible, be able to change that reasonably quickly. And again, the contract can do that, and we just need to make sure that the money is in the right place. So that's what we're always doing in terms of those operational uncertainties. However, again, by working as a team between the frontline force commander, particularly the operational planners, DNS organisation, and the industry, always have a dialogue around what the plans are and how we best suited to support those operations. And what do we expect from the industry support organisations, our partners in the industry, to do that? And again, that's a constant discussion, and making sure that we are aware of that and upgrading systems where we can. So I suppose my summary on that one is operations by their very nature are challenging and unpredictable. You can only put a level of predictability around it. We know what the aircraft can do, we know its roles, we know what we need. And providing we do a level of planning, we can keep that up. And then if we find that we're using up, kit, certain items is required more than we thought, flexibility then change quickly, which again is something we just keep an eye on. Sometimes limited by actual spares provisioning, but also something we do. So it's really keeping the contract flexible, which again, Titan, fortunately, because it's a output-based contract, allows us to do. It doesn't get hung up too much on the individual repairs. It's about delivering an outcome, and that allows us to keep flexible for operations. Over.
Thank you. From someone who's currently applying to become an engineering officer in the RAF, what would be your one main piece of advice for someone performing this role within the RAF?
Okay. So I assume that's not you, Andrew, asking that question. Otherwise, there we go. No. Yeah. So I'm conscious there's probably people out there who would have a better view on this than me. But I think from an engineering officer point of view, it's about technical leadership. Whilst undeniably, as an engineer, you need to understand the equipment you're working on, how it works, why it works that way. It's also about the leadership of the team under you and that you work with them, and that very much also includes industry more now. So, for example, that's why we embed engineer officers within the Typhoon construct and within industry constructs, and certainly why we have industry embedded within my organisation to make sure that we all understand how to work together better. But certainly it's to my view, it's technical leadership. So that ability to be able to be the leader of the team, to show the right behaviours, and to show that you understand the technical abilities of your team, and you trust them to deliver their outcome, because at the end of the day, the team deliver it, not you, and that's really key.
Thank you. I guess a follow-up question here is that with the MOD subcontracting most of the work, what sort of opportunities exist within the RAF as an engineer?
So I'd still say lots. As I said, we will never, to my mind, outsource the front line. So there is always a role for, and there will always be a role for engineer officers in that environment. So if you were to look at the jobs that we do across the MOD, they're very, very wide ranging, and in fact you'll see engineers pop up in all sorts of places. So whilst you'll start your career on the front line, supporting the front line, be it ideally on a squadron as a junior engineering officer, when you straight away you get leadership of a whole team, a shift of people to lead and going on operations. You'll then be technical roles around support to that, be it in a bay environment or weapon support. So there's some key frontline jobs there that absolutely focus you initially on your front line, which you might sort of say the foundation of your tours. From that, you'll then move into technical, more technical jobs, such as those that we see work in my team as engineering authorities, and you see their ability to take on airworthiness responsibilities, delegated airworthiness responsibilities. Again, you need to be able to prove you can make good technical decisions, and that you also understand the equipment you're working on. So we'll see there. But again, there are a lot of wider roles as well throughout the MOD, my organisation, etc. We're even seeing now we've got currently the Deputy Chief Defence for Military Capability is Air Marshal Knighton. He's an engineer, so we are all over the place in terms of the top jobs, because the skills that we generate around our technical leadership, our understanding of risk, and our understanding to numerate skills, etc., make us very employable across defence. So again, plenty of opportunities. 29 years in, and I'm still getting opportunities, and I'm sure there'll be people listening here who are in a similar vein. Over.
Thank you, Paul. We have a number of questions, but unfortunately we're running out of time for today's session. So I'd like to thank you, Paul, for a fascinating presentation and insight given by your answers. And thanks to all of you for listening and watching today and providing those interesting questions. We hope that you'll join future webinars from the IMechE. Goodbye.
Thank you.